also want to acknowledge traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people participating in this webinar. We pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and the ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. So as a quick introduction, I'm Alistair. I'm the General Manager of Clients here at Recovery Partners. So these are sessions we run every couple of months where we want to talk to a particular industry in focus. Mining for us is a very important industry. The reason being it's such a major contributor to the Australian economy. Employs over 250,000 people, which is a percentage that continues to grow in terms of total workforce. So in Australia, that's north of 2.5% of the total workforce. In the past 5 years, employment in mining has continued to increase at 27%. Without question, mining and resourcing is a really strong foundation to a lot of Australian communities, particularly those more regionally based. And we've got the pleasure of having Warwick join us today to talk in connection to the Hunter in particular, where we understand mining and resources play such a foundational or core part of employment in that space. So given the significance of mining, it's really pleasing to know that there has been a lot being done to protect people in the sector. There are key bodies that have been created many years ago in terms of the Australian Coal Association Research Program, and we have two people joining us today from ACAR to talk about how research is being funded and what programs are being created to protect the lives and well-being of those that are connected to the industry. Those efforts have already had a really positive impact. If we look at things like fatality rate reductions of 65% from 2003 to 2015. So what does that mean? That means instead of 12 workers for every 100,000 resulting in a fatality, it's now down to only 4.4. Of course, we want that number to keep getting lower, but I think we need to recognise that is a significant achievement to date. And I think it's something the industry should be quite proud of. There are lots of actions and positive change, but the sector does remain a key priority in terms of Safe Work Australia, and that the nature of the work that's being conducted. We appreciate that it is largely higher risk work. It is in connection to a higher fatality rate than a lot of other industries, ranking itself as third highest overall. So that priority status remains critical for us all on this call in terms of looking at how do we continue to work with such an important and foundational item or industry within Australia that does have evolving practices. There are things on the horizon for the sector that is going to create, evolving workplace and regulatory change. It's going to create industrial pressure. There'll be a shift in workforce demographics. So it's acknowledgement of that, but also acknowledgement of there is a huge opportunity for us to come together as an industry to better solve for the challenges of things like workplace health and safety, longer term industrial reform. So yeah, we see that as an opportunity not to be missed, and we really appreciate everyone partaking in today, and particularly our expert speakers. So means of introduction, from ACAR, we have both Tony Egan and Craig Hagan. From the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, better known as CIRA, we have Shane Billam. And then for the Hunters Jobs Alliance, we have Warwick Jordan. So thanks, guys. I know these things are difficult to make time for, but they don't happen without the gift of your time and your knowledge. So we're really thankful for your contribution, and it's important that we get that contribution. So I'll be quiet now. I look forward to handing it over to Tony Egan. So Tony works as an ACAR director, has done for greater than 10 years. Co-chair in the research committee, co-chair of Open Technology Committee. So really heavily invested there. So Tony, thank you. I know you've got a very busy schedule and you're fitting us in today. So mate, I'll throw to you to let us know a little bit more about ACAR and what's happening there from a mining sector point of view.
Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for having us today. I've been with ACAR involvement. I work for Glencore, and I've been involved in ACAR for over 20 years. So I'm one of the long-termers. I'm on the board. I'm deputy chair of the board, have been for some years now, and involved in the operational part of ACAR, and we'll go through a bit of that structure later. So next slide, please. we'll keep moving. I think we'll go past that one. We've got to get our skates on today. There's a fair bit to cover. I'm going to sort of take some of the slides as read, really, because I believe we're going to distribute them. So I'll try and just pick out the key points. ACAR was established nearly 30 years ago off the back of what was called NERDEC, which was the National Energy Research Development Council. In other words, it was a government-run organisation for funding within this space. The companies themselves took it upon them to say, we think we can do a better job of this and be more focused and industry-driven. And nearly 30 years ago, ACAR was formed off the back of NERDEC. So, you know, there's been research in this space occurring for a long, long time, and we've certainly built on that. It involves all of the major black coal mining companies in Australia. So we've got people in Western Australia, even Tasmania, and it's anything to do with black coal. So it might be recovery of tailings fines at an old colliery by someone, as well as new mining production. I think it's probably key. It covers domestic and export market, and it is black coal. So I might move on to the next slide. The structure that we operate under is it's an MOU with the government, and that's signed every 5 years. And we continue to operate on that. If the MOU is not agreed to, then the government will take back over the program. So we've just started a renewal of the next 5 years at June of 2020, and we've got another that'll run through to June of 2025. And it requires us to not only negotiate with the government about the program, but also about every producer that's related to ACAR through the black coal industry, and gaining their support and getting them on board. So it's very much driven by the industry at a grassroots level. The corporate structure, if you will, is that the Minerals Council of Australia hosts the program, and the Queensland Resources Council and the New South Wales Minerals Council, as the two major entities in Australia, sit as the shareholders of ACAR, which is Australian Coal Research Limited. The structure on the right there, you can see how that flows down into the board that I sit on, which is the ACRL board, then the research committee, which is really like the operating part of the business, and that is a combined group of the co-chairs of all of the technical committees, which are shown there, and also other interested people within. So it's not completely limited just research committee, to task committee chairs. We've got a range of people involved. They generally get 13 to 15 people at those meetings. And that group is really vested with setting the direction and monitoring the performance of the working part of the organisation, and taking counsel from the board in the overall performance of ACAR in the industry. Next, please. The pooled funding model, 5 cents of every tonne of coal, and it's been 5 cents ever since it started. So on an inflated or deflated basis over the years, it's probably equivalent to about 2-point-something cents in today's value. But we've managed to continue driving the funding because the tonnages have gone up. And so the volume of money or revenue that we bring in is in the order of, in previous years, $18 to $20 million. And so we look to try and spend that on reasonable projects and other things. We have a scholarship program as well for industry-related scholars looking for their doctorates. So there's a number of things that we foster with that research funding. The ACAR never seeks to own anything. We don't want to own any IP. We want to foster people's development of their projects, and ultimately see them bring to the commercial outcomes. So we've certainly had a big change in our focus, probably from the early years to what was fundamental research to more really looking at what's that bridge to commercialisation, and how far up that bridge does ACAR need to support the process, because if we don't, it's probably not going to get there. And that's been a big shift probably in the last 10 years in particular. And that varies from project to project. But typically every year we run probably about 25% of the funding goes to new research or new areas. And the other 75% are progressive milestone steps of what was fundamental research that's leading towards that commercialisation. And some projects, some of our major ones could run over a 6 and 7 year period, but funded on an annual basis and with milestones to keep focus. We're certainly not into giving big buckets of money and letting people run off with it and not keep some level of control and quality and outcome. The other key point there, that the research priorities are set by the industry. So that's from seeking the input from all of the producers themselves through either a direct involvement at committee levels or contact with their senior people, or through the board members of the 37 companies. There's 14 companies represented on the board, which do represent the bulk of the tonnage. And that process comes together every year in March, where we actually publish a research priorities by group. It's an overall one, but by the surface group, the underground group, etc. And then we seek input from the industry about projects. Sometimes we look to foster projects where we don't see researchers thinking. So we look for opportunities of known researchers where we try and foster the development of an area that we think needs moving on. So it can happen a couple of different ways. Next slide, please. Yep, we're going the other way. The spending varies year on year, but there's a number of key groupings. Obviously, the environment and community aspects, license to operate, plays a big piece. The health and safety aspects play a big piece every year. But there's equally engineering and maintenance improvement ideas. There's production techniques and opportunities. There's the marketing of the coal. There's a lot of work goes on in that space about the different elements of the product and what it can mean to the customers of the producing companies. And there's quite a split of people who do research. We've got everything from consultancy businesses to universities to producers themselves, and even government departments. We've had several projects in the last 4 or 5 years where government departments, both Queensland and New South Wales, have actually sought funding from ACAR to be part of the work that they're doing, which is a big bit of a shift in what's been traditionally happening. Obviously, the universities offer probably more of the fundamental research, and the other groups tend to work more in the applied areas of research, which is not so much the R but the D, and getting it out into the field. Having said that, there is unis that do some of that work as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the research priorities, that they are very broad. They can cover any aspect related to black coal, from production to rehabilitation to the exploration and development of new areas. All of those things can be covered under the research priorities. The committees set the focus each year at an individual level, and then they look to target the proposals that are coming in May. So we get a short proposal round where we look for an initial involvement of a researcher, what they're proposing. We judge those. We select a group for long proposals, and then we give them some advice on where we think they're either short or whether they, but sometimes we've actually combined submissions from different researchers. And what we're looking for in a long proposal, which gets submitted in August, and then decided upon for final funding in the October, and then we take a funding round to the board for final approval for funding to commence in the January of the following year. Some of those projects may not start exactly then, and there may be some time lags on different things, but the funding is put into a budget at that point, and then the different projects will start at different times. As you can see from that page there, it covers a hell of a spectrum. Next one, please. This is a project that was actually fostered, and I'm actually a monitor on, and it's come out of my involvement with the Earth Moving Safety Roundtable that's mentioned at the bottom of the page there. That is an industry-driven body that works with designers and suppliers of equipment to try and bridge the gap between what they're providing and what we really need. And it's a unique entity, and it started 15 years ago, and I was involved in that commencement of it, and it's now global and works globally with companies from all around the world. But we have a connection to ACAR because ACAR actually funded the original development period of Immersed when it got off the ground. So this project, Human Factors for Design Diversity, came out of some initial interaction with a number of the major producers looking at diversity of their workforce with a particular focus on gender diversity. But as the work that progressed in that space looked at it, the issues that we face are not gender specific. They're actually anthropometric, and you guys in the rehab space would probably understand that better than me, but to do with body size and shape and all those other things. So it's not necessarily just about gender. And this project, Immersed is doing work on it at a global level. But one of the things that was asked for was, well, where are the major areas of exposure? And so this project was funded as a research piece under Professor Robert Burgess-Limerick at UQ, looking at how do we actually try and quantify those things. So if you go to the next slide, it just starts to give some indications of the sorts of things where designers really haven't thought this through. So here's a couple of shots of some control devices. And Professor Limerick's the one in the middle. He's quite a vertically challenged person, Robin. And clearly he can't even reach that thing. And even the big guy on the left, that's Ian Curran, Ian's about 6'2", he's just about to reach it. And here on the right-hand side, we've got a gentleman who's an operator who's meant to lock out the truck. This is the main isolation point. There's some other control switches and things. Now, depending on whether the truck's empty or loaded, that height can go up and down. But these are functions that we're requiring people to do. And through the course of this investigation, we've seen some very interesting approaches from people like crawling across the bumper bar to get to some of these things, which is probably not what we want. So next slide, please. There's been some interesting things that have come out of the cab ergonomics area. People with short legs struggle to reach the pedals, but the design of the chairs, due to the high levels of vibration, are such that they've got a moving base that allows for absorption of that vibration. We found one particular young woman who was suffering significant back injuries and other things, and just putting up with it because her legs were short, and to reach the pedal, she had to lower the chair down so that it actually negated all of the suspension qualities of the chair. Yet, this thing is a design issue, and dealt with properly can be addressed, but it had been ignored. So this research is bringing forward some really significant highlighted issues that are probably not the tip of the iceberg, but they're out there and they're real, and we need to deal with them. And we've seen this, whether it's a lady or a man, if you're still too short, you're going to suffer the same issues. And we've seen that over time. Keep going, please. The placement of things and reach and access becomes a big issue in this as well. So we particularly looked at certainly the operating aspects, but where we see a lot of exposure is in the maintenance activities on these large pieces of equipment. And so it's not always easy. And the manufacturer of the vehicle, it isn't always easy for them to try and deal with the issue either. So there's a combination of events occur between the site themselves and having suitable stands and other things, and also then making that available so that people can use them. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. You keep going, please. So in terms of the outcomes of this, it's one of those fundamental pieces of work that come to play that will provide a basis for engagement about design and other aspects to see if we can engineer these things out. It'll also play to looking at the standards that are in this space. I mean, if you read the ISO standard for design at the moment, it probably is focused around a 6'2" North American Aryan male, which is probably not that representative of our workforces. So we see that having some of this fundamental data will allow us to influence the standards groups and therefore get things changed at that base level, because all the manufacturers refer to those standards in their opening part of their design approaches. The Immersed group will use this information as part of that process to influence. The Immersed has been granted a liaison status at the International Society for Standards. So although that's normally a representation that comes via countries, Immersed has been granted the liaison status to become a conduit for speeding up the process of the committees understanding what's happening and therefore drafting and publishing standards. The 6 and 7 years that it's been taking is just too long. It's also probably going to provide some ongoing research areas in terms of some of the problems that we're facing and whether what else we could do about them. Next slide, please. So this is the last one, ACARP itself. This is the website. If you're looking for previous research in an area, the search bar works pretty well, and it'll give you a short précis of each of the different projects. You can have a look at those, and if you want to download them for industry members, so those that are producers, we get them for free. But if you want to get one and you're not, if you're related to a research organisation or others, I would make contact with ACAR potentially about getting your hands on that report. So you might save some money, but for others, it's a $50 payment. So ACAR has been around a long time. It continually challenges itself to be nimble and addressing the industry's problems. And in fact, even at the board meeting that we held last week, that I chaired, we had a long discussion, and it'll be continued one of the next few months, about the research strategy going forward with the very dynamic and changing nature of social license to operate and other aspects that are going on at the moment. And every day in the press, you're seeing lots and lots of challenges, both locally and internationally, about where we fit in. Our role is not to be political. Our role is to underpin and make things available to people to make valid decisions. Our job is not to make those decisions about one thing or another. It's to provide a base of understanding. And we're very, very, very focused on not walking up to that line of the political piece. That's the job of the MCA and the Queensland Resources Council, New South Wales Minerals Council, those sorts of people. And hence that strong connection about the ownership of ACAR. But certainly there is a very big firewall about the research piece crossing into the political space. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Tony. I know there's probably a lot you could talk to, and you've done a really great job to condense something that probably doesn't deserve to be condensed. So I know I probably speak for all of us here when we look forward to hearing from you down the line. I'll look to reach back to make sure we give you a chance to maybe tell us a little bit more about some of those research projects. There is a question there around mental health, which I think is a good one. It's something that's probably going to happen and continue to explore in this space. So really well.
Quite a body of work that's happened in that space already.
Yeah.
It was something that came to us probably 6 or 7 years ago, and we were quite challenged by it, being a bunch of engineers and other things. And we ended up having some major sessions where we brought the mental health professionals into the research committee groups and into the technical groups. And I think it was a really good move to give people that deeper understanding of what the challenges were. Yeah. And since then, we've funded quite a number of mental health programs.
Okay.
Research space.
Access to those through the website. Perfect.
Yeah. So they've been completed, and there's a couple underway at the moment. It's quite a good initiative that called Mates in Mining that's been run out of the Minerals Council, but some of the fundamental work that went into that came from the research group. The other thing I want to do in the future, I think, is probably given the immersed focus on design and removing of problems, and you guys dealing with the rehab aspects, I think there's quite a lot in the immersed space, from whole body vibration to the health issues and other things. So be happy to come back and maybe do something in that space, because it's a unique body.
Yeah, perfect. No, definitely we'll take you up on that offer. Thank you so much, Tony. Craig, I'll invite you to come off mute now for us. So Craig Hagan is joining us again as a representative within ACAR, but also in his capacity as a HSET professional over at Yancoal. So Craig brings 30 years of industry experience in safety, HR, operational leadership, and we're very fortunate to have your invaluable experience available to us, Craig. So implemented significant change and efficiency programs, including the establishment of sustainable cultural change initiatives, which obviously then contributes to safety, performance, profitability. So yeah, these have been done at some really big name organisations, Yancoal being one of those equally. So yeah, Craig, if you'd like to take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. And it was through that experience that I was invited onto ACARP, and I thought I'd just give a bit of a contextual look at how the technical committees sit and then how the actual task groups underneath operate and work. So I actually co-chair the health and safety task groups, and we provide specific advice and information back into the committees, also around the open cut and the underground committee. So you can see there's a number of task groups that provide the overall committee with the support and that specialised advice in around some of the research projects. So we don't expect, and I take Tony's point earlier about engineers, we don't expect engineers to be over everything, even though they're quite intelligent people, still need those specialists to be able to give them the advice. So next slide. You can see there that's the group of representation that occurs on the health and safety group members. So a really good representation across black coal businesses across Australia. And we really talk about what are some of the priorities in relation to health and safety to the industry sector and what could be beneficial research that's been put forward. Next one. So you can see from the priorities for 2021, we're really focused in the health and safety area. We're around the prevention of harm from areas like, spontaneous combustion, ignitions, might be mine fires, could be explosions or outbursts, ventilation issues, dust, which in the respirable disease area, we've done a lot of work and a lot of funding around that. And then also strata failures, and looking at improved understanding around detection, prediction, protection, selection, and design of major hazard management systems. Certainly one of our key focuses is management of health, and that includes mental health and fatigue. So it was good to see the question earlier around mental health. Yes, we do have active projects, as Tony mentioned, and I'm sure there'll be more emerging ones over time as we become more mature in Australia around our development of better mental health techniques and practices. We also look at fatigue. So we've got some interesting projects at the moment around fatigue, where one with CQU, we've just done some lab tests on setting up groups of cohorts to go through 12-hour shifts and looking at whether what the science tells us around strings of 12-hour shifts on night work and whether it has a cognitive change to individuals' capacities along that 12-hour night shift period on a 7-day string versus 4 days. So some really interesting stuff coming out of that. And that's a project at the moment where we're looking that it might end up through the researchers' recommendation of extending that project into a next round review the following year. We also look at areas of communication to employees and contractor safety measures. So they might be improvements around information training, instruction, operator interfaces and vehicle interaction. That might be around automation, remote monitoring control systems, looking at musculoskeletal disorders, improving ergonomics, might be roadway conditions, all the factors that may be leading to where some of these injuries are occurring. Certainly airborne and noise contaminants are a huge area that we do work in. Emergency response measures, looking at adequacy and effectiveness and whether there's research projects such as being able to communicate through Earth using low frequency pulses where we may have people that are in an unfortunate situation where they're trapped in a mine, don't have any form of hard barrier communications, the other ways that we can do it. Also looking around robots and also drones for use in underground mine rescue practices. So some really very different projects there that we do research and investigation on. And then also in key practices, whether that's around issues relating to legislative leading practice alternatives and the culture space. Next slide. I'm not going to dwell on this because Tony's touched on it, but this is just to give you an understanding, whereas from a research point of view, ACAR annually looks to go out to the researchers and look at where there's any projects that might fall in alignment with our priorities. That's done through a measured approach from Australian newspaper. The timing of that is roughly the same, but in each of the years, generally that April, May area. And then we go through a process of looking at short proposals and long proposals. So in the July aspect, what happens is the working groups get together, we go through the short proposals and look at what will provide us some excellent opportunities for enhancement in key particular areas around our priorities. From those, we look at recommending up from a task group level in the health and safety space up to the technical committees for the underground and the open cut. And then from there, we look at the long proposals and then final notification. But I will stress it's really important to check the ACAR website, as Tony mentioned, for the annual update on funding opportunities if this is an area of interest within your particular fields, or you know researchers that can provide beneficial research to some of our priorities. Next slide. So the roles of members of the task group. So we provide advice on the annual industry sector and emerging health safety priorities. We also review the short proposal against those priorities and make the recommendation. And we also then take on a role as project monitors. So the monitor's role is essentially an advisory one in relation to the direction of the project and what it was originally approved to. We're also looking at assessing the technical progress points. We're about ensuring the delivery of value to the industry, and also making sure that we provide the right advice to researchers and ACAR on potential project extensions. Next slide. So just to give an idea, what I've done here is just put together what are some of the current or completing projects within our brief. You'll see these are all in the recent areas of finalisation or have just completed. But this is just to give you some context of what health and safety related projects are. The one with the star at the top are areas where I see that might spark some direct interest to your profession and area. Not to say that any of the other areas would be less, but you can see there's a number of different, whether that's been around whole body vibration, whether looking at proximity detection, whether we're looking at emerging issues that have been around tyre and rim wheel safety, because as you're aware, we've had a number of fatalities across the past 5 years in this space, especially a lot of work around dust, as you can see, and looking at the characteristics of pneumococciatus and doing some leading work in that area. Next page. Also, there's some of the mining equipment human factors design for workforce diversity, as mentioned by Tony. You can see that's a highlighted one. Human-centered design for new technology in mining, and the resilience in mental health in mining. This was a key targeted project that was taken on to look at whether there are any specific nuances that related to mining which were separate to what we'd see in the general population. And this was looking at the research around that and trying to either identify what they are or whether there is no difference in those processes. So that one's just in the process of doing its final report, and is scheduled to actually look at proposed current extension of that work to continue on in the next year. So some interesting base findings they've found so far. Next slide. You can see we continue on here looking at areas that I mentioned earlier, the consecutive night shifts, nighttime alertness versus the daytime sleep cycles. Some fascinating stuff that's come out of that for us around potential even shift change times in relation to looking at people's cycle of sleep and when that optimal period is. Also looking at areas there around human factors more in tyre handling as well. How are we actually doing that? What does the research show us in terms of our techniques and processes? And one that you might be interested in is C33011 is around that longitudinal study of latent disease in relation to coal mines lung disease. That's an ongoing project, but certainly one to watch and some really good research. Next page. And then finally, looking at, once again, another one which would be relevant around human factors design for diversity within the emergence control framework. If you have a look there at the moment, there's 36 projects related to health and safety across that period. And when we talk about total current funding, there's just on $9.2 million of funding that's actually gone into the process. And if you look just in the respirable dust related area, our research projects at the moment funded by ACAR is more than $3.2 million into this field. Next slide. Following on from Tony, so we really encourage you to go to our website. Our website's probably the key area where you can get the latest relevant information. You can either go to the home screen, you can search on there, You can go to the actual category that you're looking for. If you're looking for reports, or if you wanted to see the funding opportunities, you'll know the tab up the top where you can click on funding. And there's also search functionality. If there's something that you can't find, you can go into the more detailed search. But if you want access to any of the reports on any projects, if you'd like to see the projects, you can certainly go to our website, and that information is there in more detail. Next slide. And the website is acarp.com.au, or you can contact the ACARP office if you have any additional inquiries. I hope that's given a really good comprehensive Cook's tour of what the task groups do and some of the health and safety related projects which we get involved with, and just gives you a bit more of an insight as to not only what can relate back to your area of professionalism, but what might be opportunities in your area in the future with ACARP. Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you so much, Craig. And look, really nice way to just wrap up everything ACARP. Amazing the amount of research work that's there. That's a huge amount underway. To think you've got over 3 million in the pipeline against just lung disease of itself is huge. So really well done. Commend you guys in the work that's being completed. Next, we'll hand over to Shane Gillum. So Shane brings 20 years of clinical experience as a physiotherapist and has held various roles within the government, self-insurance agencies for case management, injury management, work health and safety. So Shane's going to talk to us as the Manager of Health Policy Prevention and Supervision in connection to CIRA and the mammoth task that they're currently undertaking. It probably actually is comparable to what ACARP are trying to do, where he's delivering a value-based healthcare framework. For those of us on the call in connection to health, we understand just how big a mouthful that is. But yeah, Shane's going to work us through that. So Shane, I'll hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alistair, and thanks everyone for having me along today. So as Alistair outlined, we've got a vision, and it's a long-term vision for value-based healthcare within CIRA as a regulator of the New South Wales Workers' Comp and also CTP schemes. Next slide, please. So essentially, the vision of healthcare has been born out of CIRA's healthcare review. In New South Wales, value-based healthcare, it really does mean continually striving to deliver care that provides good outcomes for people who are injured. That's not only the health outcomes that matter to people, but also the experience of receiving care, the experience of actually delivering care as well, and also the effectiveness and efficiency of care as well. Next slide, please. So this just gives there's a few papers here. There is resources available on our website. The healthcare review final report that largely underpinned this steering of our vision towards value-based care. A lot of it was also underpinned from research and an analysis done by EY, looking into healthcare and personal injury schemes. And the other really important part too is that CIRA does have obligations under the State Insurance and Care and Governance Act, and that is largely driving or minimising the cost to community of workplace injuries and also injuries from motor accidents, promoting efficiency, effectiveness and viability of the schemes, and ensuring that people that get injured have access to treatment that will assist in their recovery. So a value-based care framework really aligns well with all of that. Next slide, please. So this here just gives you the little formula. It's not really complex. Essentially, your value is largely underpinned on your outcomes and your costs. As your outcomes improve, your value obviously improves. One of the other ways you can deliver value is to reduce costs, and sometimes the cost may be absolutely appropriate for the care, but if you're getting a better outcome, then your value is improving. The other side of value-based care is looking at what costs are being delivered that necessarily don't add value, and trying to work out ways to either reduce the prevalence of that or eliminate it. Next slide, please. The value-based care journey that we're on, it aligns very clearly with New South Wales Health's vision as well. They've been on the journey for a while now, and they're sort of illustrating to us that it is It is a slow burn, and we recognise that there's a lot of work to do as part of this process. But this, and the slides will be available. I'm sure, Alistair, you'll be able to forward those out. Fantastic. So that just sort of gives you an overview of they're just snippets from the New South Wales Health website. So that just gives you some vision of that. Next slide, please. So CIRA's actions to date, we've published the Value-Based Healthcare Outcomes Framework, and also we've published on the website the first quarterly healthcare costs and outcomes dashboard. That dashboard is essentially an illustration of utilisation and costs across the workers' comp and CTP schemes. It's the first time we've been able to actually bring both of the schemes together and draw comparisons between the two. And what will happen is that dashboard will develop over time as we look to increase our visibility of the different metrics that we're looking to collect. Obviously, we've got a certain amount of metrics now in regards to utilisation costs, average costs, time to treatment, and so forth, and return to work. But the really the other really big piece of this value-based care rollout is to enhance our ability to get outcomes-based measures. The other thing too is, sorry, you could stay on that slide. Sorry about that. We've announced that we're going to work through an implementation phase, which is a co-design, and we'll be in touch with stakeholders about that. We've also done a lot of work working with insurers to reduce leakage, and that includes a whole lot of analysis, and also we've established a working group, which I lead, working with insurers to identify either low value care or areas of leakage within the system that can be mitigated. We've also established a lower back pain clinical advisory group, and they're working quite hard on models of care and looking to work in partnership with industries and with the medical fraternities as well to develop those models of care and establish what we see as value care. Next slide, please. That's really just an overview of what I showed before, the Value-Based Healthcare Outcomes Framework document there on the right-hand side, and that is available on the website for you to have a look at in detail. Next slide, please. So this slide here illustrates diagrammatically what the healthcare outcome framework is, and essentially we have the injured person at the centre of the framework. One of the main findings of our healthcare review is also that we just need to improve the quality of our data, not only the stuff that we're collecting, but also a need to increase our availability and access to outcomes data as well. We understand healthcare costs are increasing, and we just need to understand that it's actually delivering value, and that's really the bigger part of this whole massive piece of work that we're undertaking. You can see that there are 6 domains within the framework. The top 3 above the line, they are 3 domains that relate purely to the people that are injured in the workplace or on our roads, and that's about physical and mental health, well-being, and also the injured person's experience and accessibility to the appropriate care that they need. Below the line, you can see the 3 domains that relate to the outcomes, and that is to do with effectiveness and efficiency of healthcare delivery, the safety and quality of healthcare, and also healthcare provider capability, delivery, and experience as well. Next slide, please. This one here just basically brings forward the 6 domains that sit within the healthcare framework, just so that you've got a nice, easy visual of them. And if we go to the next slide, we just sort of start to do a little bit of drilling down into what those domains are like. You can see physical and mental health. Within domain 1, there's obviously a whole lot of subdomains, 1.1, 2, and 3. And if we go to the next slide, that then just gives you an illustration of some of the metrics that we're looking at collecting, some of the metrics we're already collecting. So essentially, it gives you a breakdown of within the framework, and you can have a look at that too if you want to access it from the website. Just gives you an understanding of what we're looking to collect in the future and what we're currently collecting as well. And if you pop to the next slide, if that's okay. This slide gives you a bit of a I guess, a bit of a view forward on how we see this this piece of work unfolding. As I said, I haven't said it yet, but the framework is an aspirational document, and you can appreciate that the implementation is going to take some time. It sort of shows that over the next 2+ years, what we see is making up those horizons of work. And the slides will be there for you to have a look at to get a bit more detail. But Horizon 1 for the first 6 months, really about establishing the governance structure, the implementation, public consultation, trying to finalise metric definitions. And they might not be definitions or metrics that we are going to collect across the whole of the framework. It's really our starting point, and trying to understand, and as we engage with the implementation partners, to get an understanding of what will work, what can be collected, what's possible to collect in the future. We need to also be mindful that the implementation piece needs to take consideration of the operationalisation of that collection, and being mindful of industry and what they're capable of collecting easily, and trying to make sure that it's not too burdensome. Next slide, please. So the reporting on the outcomes, how will we report on the metrics? Essentially, that dashboard that I mentioned before, that's also on the CIRA website. And I can give Alistair the link to that. I don't think this has the link, this presentation, for the dashboard. But essentially, that dashboard will develop. I was involved in the, I guess, the publication of it recently. Wasn't involved in all the back end work. A lot of work went into it, but essentially it's a great piece of work that allows us to also then present other more outcomes based data as we go forward and as we collect more. There'll also be annual reporting for metrics that are collected less often. That might be things like the injured person surveys that we have done recently. They're obviously not those sort of surveys. You can't conduct them on a regular basis. They have to be done more on an annual basis. I'm mindful of time, so I'll just keep going if that's all right. Next slide. And so essentially the results are going to be used to drive targeted action to improve scheme outcomes, support insurers to provide injured people with value-based care, provide information to injured persons that will help them promote an informed choice, so put them in the control seat as well about the type of care that they are looking to receive, and promote self-improvement for clinicians, and also measure population health associated with scheme improvements. And also inform our supervisory activity from both supervision of providers, but also of insurers as well. The next slide, please. And just talking more about the data, obviously we have some data that we're already collecting, but we need to, some of the data sources will have to be co-designed with scheme participants, and get a better understanding of that. I've already talked to that, so that's okay. And the next slide, please. Consultation was July through to September, 28 submissions, and the really comforting thing was that a lot of the submissions aligned with New South Wales Health's approach to healthcare, and also with CIRA's vision for value-based care as well. So basically, the public reporting will increase, public reporting of performance will also increase transparency and accountability. And essentially, we're going to be, the vision is to use a framework to provide timely evidence-based delivery of healthcare services for people that are injured. And next slide, please. And really sorry, it was a quick run through, but I'm recognising that we're short on time. But essentially, it's basically going to be progressed over 2 to 5 years. We will get better as we move forward as far as our data collection and our data presentations. But essentially, it is all about people getting the right care at the right time for the right injuries, and basically being supported through their insurers, through their employers, to get back to the I guess to get the best possible outcome that they can get. So thank you so much for listening.
No worries. Thank you, Shane, for unpacking that. Yeah, it's a massive body of work, like I said from the outset, and I definitely congratulate Ciro and yourself on the steps you've taken thus far. I think to make this move towards transparency is fantastic. I can speak for myself in terms of those quarterly reviews, just that insight as to where spend is, utilization. I think that's going to be a massive body of info that's going to continue to inform the work that we do, particularly talking from a provider perspective. So thank you for taking the steps you're taking. I think ultimately it's going to make for a much better system, and one where quality of care will continue to improve, which is what we're all here for. So that's, it's really cool. So well done.
Absolutely. No worries. Thank you. Pleasure.
Last but not least, we have Warwick, and Warwick, apologies about time. We are running to a pretty short schedule. What we might look at doing with yourself, mate, is linking in maybe some written work at the end, but definitely keen to unpack things with you in the next 7 minutes. So we're talking all things Hunter Jobs Alliance, which is a really interesting and exciting body of work. So just as a means of introduction, Warwick works as the coordinator there for the Hunter Jobs Alliance. The Alliance is a local union and community organisation that is lobbying government and business to make sure that there's adequate support for workers and investing in jobs that are not only here now, but jobs that will be here into the future. So yeah, Warwick's got an extensive past in working with federal government right through to local government. And mate, I might just invite you to give a bit of an overview as to what the Hunter Jobs Alliance is and what you're up to at the minute.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alistair. Look, I'll keep it pretty snappy. Look, so Hunter Jobs Alliance, fairly unique and also a fairly new organisation as well. So we've got 9 unions who are involved in the Alliance. Notably, we've got Manufacturing Workers Union, the ETU, nurses, and a number of other unions in the education, care and services sector. But interestingly, we also have a couple of environment groups as well. So the Jobs Alliance came about last year with a bit of a recognition that issues around economic change in the Hunter were probably lacking a little bit of a specific focus around how we deal with big structural economic change challenges, and we're suffering a little bit from being a little bit overly politicised. And so there was a bit of an interest from particularly the unions, but also some of the environment groups that were locally focused, to try and focus a little bit on advocacy that supported workers and individuals and communities through some of the bigger structural change issues that we're looking at in the region. So, obviously it's no secret that, we've seen some pretty significant changes starting to happen around domestic energy generation, and particularly coal-fired power sector. And we've also, seen a range of different challenges, but also opportunities around manufacturing, not least the increased penetration of renewable energy and what that means for some of our bigger industry producers, both in terms of future opportunities, but also some of the live challenges to how they do their business as well. But also, obviously looking at our coal export sector as well. If you live in the Hunter region, whether you're an accountant working at Honeysuckle in Newcastle or a TA in a shed in Muswellbrook, the industry's highly relevant to the future of the place. And so our focus has been very much on, how do we advocate, particularly for government, but also business, and work collaboratively to get workers and communities the kind of support they need, and also to make sure that we're thinking about future opportunities as well. I guess where it starts to become directly relevant to some of the folks on the call today is, the way we look at it is, yes, there's a pretty broad diversity of views about what's going to happen to the Hunter economy in future. But we know that there's some changes coming down the line, and the type of things that we know you can do to help workers and communities through that, they stack up regardless of, whether people are seeing a change in coal mining or power generation in 10 years or whether it's 20 years. The ideas around needing to be more proactive about attracting other types of investment, supporting workers through change, organising ourselves better to deal with those kind of changes, regardless of whether you're dealing with a cyclical change or people moving from one sector to the other and needing more support. We know that there's a lot more that can be done. And so we've focused really explicitly on a couple of things and are making some progress. We think that the idea of making this a bit more of an inclusive conversation, the things that go on, particularly from further afield in terms of media and what have you, we find out particularly helpful. So we've tried to focus on really practical things that particularly government should be expected to do, but also the community can put their hand up and the business community can put their hand up as well. So very much on how do we coordinate and organise ourselves better as a region to attract investment? How do we provide those type of services that are really useful for workers when they're looking to move careers, transition, get retrained, what have you. And, from past experience working in the sector, I know that there's more that can be done on that. So we're quite focused on that. Also quite focused on, looking at the fact that we need to create more diversified job opportunities and more opportunities full stop in the region. And we know there's a lot of things we can do as far as attracting investment. And the last area that we've been focused on a bit more recently has been very much increasing those expectations, particularly on investors. We know there's a lot of money out there that's looking at some of the sectors that we have in the Hunter that a lot of people are employed in. And, some of them are shifting their money elsewhere. But we really need to be creating some expectations on those investors to make sure that they do the right thing to be supporting communities and investing in opportunities in places like the Hunter as well. So, that's a very quick, how they go, 6-minute rundown. But look, if anybody wanted to understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do and how we're going about it and how people might be able to benefit, you can check us out on our website. It's just hunterjobsalliance.org.
Perfect. And what we'll do, as I said, was organise a chance for you to maybe detail a little bit more from a written component. Like there were some questions I was really keen to ask you around, the decarbonising world and what opportunities exist with those people across this space that, we can do to better support people for, sustainable employment, things that are the pillars of welfare in our communities. So let's catch that offline and we can share that with this wider group in a written fashion. And yeah, we're definitely keen to monitor your progress because it's a big job to undertake. And we're grateful that there's someone like yourself heading up that because I think it's going to be vital for the long-term sustainability of our communities, particularly those more directly connected to mining. So thank you.
Great. No, thanks, Alistair. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. Look, if there wasn't a lot of questions that came through the chat function, I have to say. So if you do find that you had any questions that you wish you'd asked or we didn't quite cover what you wanted, please ping me an email. I'll be happy to go back to the speakers. They're all very generous with their time after the event as well. So they'll be happy to have answered. We will be sharing the slides, so they'll be available to you. I certainly echo the thoughts of the speakers. Jump on websites, go have a look. They're all really good websites with lots of available information, whether that's ACAR, Sierra or Hunter Jobs Alliance. So I think you'll have some good information to trawl through in the coming days. Thanks so much for being a part of today. We're very grateful for you sharing your time in what's a very busy time. I'm sure we've all got another Zoom meeting to get to, so I'll leave you to your days and thanks very much.